Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Previously on this channel we looked at the iconic arcade game known as WWF Wrestlefest, a memorable video game from the golden era of professional wrestling, which remains fondly remembered to this day. In the period when Hulkamania was running wild, there was nothing quite like Wrestlefest, and the game's cartoony graphics and intuitive gameplay stood out from everything else that was available on the market. Bearing all of this in mind, it is music to old school wrestling fans' ears that 30 years after Wrestlefest's release, a true follow-up to this well-known gem has finally hit the market. Retromania is a brand new wrestling game that looks to capture the spirit of the cartoon era of wrestling, a title that was programmed to be a callback to this great time period in both pro wrestling and gaming alike. So today we're going to be exploring the development of this game and how well this game delivered on its aim of producing a Wrestlefest-like experience. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Retromania, the brand new follow-up to WWF Wrestlefest. Yeah! But first, a word from me. If you like what I usually do on Top Hat Gaming Man and you like wrestling, then why not after this video check out my brand spanking new channel, Top Hat Wrestling Man, where with the help of others within the wrestling industry, I will be regularly covering various elements of stupid wrestling history. Once you are done with today's gaming content, go check out the mad history of Shelton Benjamin's Mama, a ludicrous chapter in WWE history. Anyway, I will remind you about this new channel again at the end. So for now, let's get ready to rumble. In the latter half of the 1980s, American wrestling's popularity would explode. The expansion of cable television and pay-per-view, coupled with the efforts of promoters such as Vince McMahon, saw professional wrestling shift from a system controlled by numerous regional companies to eventually being dominated by just one today. Vince McMahon's WWF brought wrestling to dizzy new heights with super shows like WrestleMania, showcases that would mix the stars of professional wrestling with Hollywood actors and pop culture icons, further catapulting wrestling into an entire new stratosphere. This success was further capitalised on with the company launching all sorts of merchandise, from toys to lunchboxes, clothing ranges and of course video games. Most early WWF games were far from great, as the company's home publisher, Acclaim, who sometimes also published games under the name LJN, would often instruct development houses to rush games out. None of the WWF games developed by Westerners over this period set the world on fire. But away from the home, the arcade market panned out completely different for Vince McMahon's promotion. The first WWF arcade game was developed and published by Japanese company Technos Japan in 1989. The same Technos Japan who had found success previously with the amazing Double Dragon franchise, a series I've continued to cover to death on this channel, and for good reason. Like the first two Double Dragon games, WWF Superstars was created under the leadership of Yoshihisa Kishimoto, who had managed to turn out yet another awesome combat-based title that featured awesome cartoony artwork. This revolutionary title implemented an amazing for its time grappling and attack system, allowing players to execute headlocks, toss opponents, throw them against the ropes and more. Players could even ascend to the corner post to perform high-risk manoeuvres, or take the action to the outside to brawl around the ring. The game was great and made even more memorable by featuring 8 of the biggest names of the Hulkamania period. Kishimoto's Superstars was truly spectacular. When it comes to Superstars though, what no one would realise was that the best was still to come. WWF Wrestlefest, released 2 years later in 1991, was even more spectacular. The game offered more impressive graphics, the appearance of 12 wrestlers this time around, new exciting stipulations such as cage matches, and most important of all, supported up to 4 players simultaneously, allowing for 4 gamers to take part in tag team matches. Players, holla holla holla! Bringing into account what a completely different level of quality WWF Wrestlefest was to any wrestling game that could be experienced in homes in 1991, it is not surprising whatsoever with regards to how loved this game is. It was a game every wrestling fan dreamed of taking home, which they simply couldn't, which over time would just add to the title's legendary status. Past this point, wrestling games would evolve over time, with the next arcade installment being developed in America by Midway, who would create a wrestling game using the mould of their successful Mortal Kombat games. Just like how Technos of Japan had channeled the success of Double Dragon with their wrestling games prior. But the overall experience, while still entertaining, is not quite as memorable as Wrestlefest. As for the Wrestlefest brand, it would make a sort of comeback with the release of WWE Wrestlefest in the early 2010s. This iOS game would feature modern day WWE superstars mixed with wrestling legends, drawn in a similar art style to the wrestlers that could be found in the 1991 game. But being nothing more than a microtransaction filled mobile game, the title failed to capture the spirit of the original. In 2021, now 30 years removed from the release of Wrestlefest, wrestling games are vastly different to what players could experience back then. But that does not mean that there are not legions of fans out there who miss this simplistic period, which is where Retromania is now here to help us. Retromania was developed by Retrosoft Studios, a company owned by Mike Herman. Herman is both a long-time fan of wrestling and old school gaming, so Retromania is a title that brought his interests to life. Herman, who has a background in accounting, finance software and management, played a role in designing the game, hiring the team who worked on it, controlling the budget and generally managing the project overall. Throughout the development process, he would even occasionally edit some of the pixel art for his dream sequel to Wrestlefest, a title he claims to have loved so much as a child. Now, a dream to make a game is one thing, but achieving said feat is a different kettle of fish altogether, as we see on occasion so regularly on platforms such as Kickstarter and Indiegogo. So what elements was it that helped make Retromania a reality? Well, obviously with a management and accounting background himself, Herman was able to utilise his skills well in said areas. But by building a good team around him, the success of Retromania became all the more likely. The licensing and business development side of things was handled by Michael Archer, a man who already had a wealth of experience working in both the gaming and wrestling industries, including even working with WWE directly for 14 years and holding a job role within Acclaim for 7. Michael utilised his contacts within the wrestling industry to sort out the licensing agreements for this game that would help build the Retromania roster. It would be first announced that the game was coming to Nintendo Switch on YouTube, via the gaming news channel RGT85, where he would be joined by former WWE superstar Stevie Richards. Richards would lay out to the viewers exactly what Retromania was, explaining the game's concept, its features and even revealing some of the game's roster members. Speaking of RGT85, he along with a cornucopia of other online content creators would even go on to make cameos in said game, bringing the link between wrestling and gaming even closer together, but we will talk more about this aspect as we progress. Throughout the development process, we would learn more about Retromania as the months persisted, mostly through the Retro Studios YouTube channel itself, where Mike Herman would regularly deliver developer blogs, constantly keeping eager fans in the loop with regards to where the team stood when it came to working on the project. For those who have been following my channel for a long time, from my Double Dragon videos, you'll be aware that the original license holders of Wrestlefest, known as Technos Japan, are no more, with the company filing for bankruptcy in the mid-90s. Most of the Technos licenses, including Double Dragon and Wrestlefest, both eventually ended up in the hands of Arc System Works, who Retrosoft Studios acquired the Wrestlefest license from, making Retromania more than just a spiritual sequel to the classic WWF arcade game. By the time the game was released on Steam, the first platform the game arrived on, Retromania touted a number of features. These included 2 to 8 player local multiplayer, customization allowing over 50 different match variations, beautiful 2D art animation sprites with over 700 frames of animation and animated backgrounds, a story mode, a traditional arcade mode, custom entrance themes, and plenty more surprises for everyone who picks up the game. In fact, they have even promised DLC that will expand on the game's roster and add more features, provided that the game gets enough support from consumers. When it comes to the original Wrestlefest game, it was largely based around a quest for the WWF Tag Team Championship. For the sake of some continuity, and to assist in celebrating this game's heritage, the Road Warriors returned, with both Hawk and Animal being playable amongst this game's roster of 16 fighters, a roster I may add that is significantly larger than in Wrestlefest. As for the rest of the roster, it consists of a lively bunch of individuals plucked not just from across the current wrestling scene, but wrestling history overall. As joining the LOD, we have more old school stars such as Nikita Koloff and Austin Idol, certainly grapplers who may appeal to the more old school demographic. We then have a host of wrestlers who made a name for themselves in ECW. These include the innovator of violence, Tommy Dreamer, and all 3 members of the Blue World Order, the ludicrous group who would parody WCW's famous NWO. We then have the likes of Brian Mayer and Matt Cardona, who are still fresh off of their WWE work as Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins, who may instantly offer some appeal to more modern fans of mainstream wrestling. We then have a few well-known indie darlings from the US scene such as Warhorse, Jeff Cobb and Colt Cabana, and even a couple of Brits. Out of these, the game gives us Zack Sabre Jr., whose technical skills have made him a big star in Japan, and Nick Aldis, who is a former UK Gladiator, TNA Wrestling Heavyweight Champion, and current reigning NWA Heavyweight Champion, thus meaning he is the man to beat in this game. Finally, the game features a character known as Johnny Retro, the character we play as in the game's story mode, who is currently back in WWE wrestling under his John Morrison name. Looking at the roster, while arguably already offering a mix of characters for everyone, the game is also looking to add James Storm, Chris Bay and Mr. Hughes as a post-release DLC. In fact, let's be fair, roster-wise the only thing the game is missing is Richard Parliament, aka Big Daddy Top Hat himself. However, I will be defending Retro Gaming YouTube in person later this year, when I take on wrestling news YouTuber Simon Miller. So stay tuned to both this channel and my new wrestling one to learn more about this October 17th 2021 bout. Yeah! To bring further diversity to the game, there are 13 different arenas in which characters can brawl in. Some of these arenas are more traditional wrestling settings, such as a Japanese arena and the set of NWA Power, where some stages seem to be placed in the game for promotional purposes, such as the Pro Wrestling Tees warehouse and an entire stage built around Stevie Richards' current fitness business. The most striking stage of them all though is the gaming convention level, where every crowd member who is watching the action appears to be a real person within the US online gaming community. There are too many cameos to go through them all here, but they range from the likes of big channel creators such as Beat 'em Up Woods and Metal Jesus to lesser known ones such as the lads from the Level 857 podcast, a lovely group of people who had me on their show a few months ago. As for the main gameplay modes, as mentioned earlier, we have a story mode where we must play as Johnny Retro, where throughout we eventually run into this game's eclectic cast of characters. The plot offers the interesting concept as playing as Mr. Retro, who is making a wrestling comeback from injury with the early aid of Stevie Richards' fitness helping him get back into shape, which to be fair I felt offered a pretty smooth integration of the game's tutorial into the actual story itself. The other main mode is known as 10 Pounds of Gold, which features you playing as a wrestler of your choice in a more traditional arcade mode in a quest to take down Nick Aldis for the NWA Heavyweight Championship. Like Wrestlefest and Superstars of old, when you eventually win the belt you face off against the characters in the game again, this time defending the belt. Across play modes, players can compete in singles, tag team, 6-man tag, 8-man tag, 3-ways, 4-ways, retro rumbles and more. There are even differing cage match types, such as a chain-linked one and a more traditional big blue steel cage. The game certainly does offer more content than Wrestlefest before it. So, after covering this game's development, and many of the features that this game contains, the big question you may be asking yourself is how does the actual gameplay included stack up to the likes of Wrestlefest? From my experience playing the gameplay certainly has a lot of commonalities. Arguably even at times too many commonalities. For anyone who has played the old school Technos of Japan WWF games, you will be fully aware that the game is eager to eat your credits, which means you often find yourself in situations where your CPU opponent eats at your life bar quickly. Wrestlefest would incentivise the player to put more of their money into the cabinets by restoring gamers' life bars every time they did so. So provided you had enough money, anyone could beat Wrestlefest in the end. But beating the game on limited credits was obviously extremely difficult. One of the first things I noted when I began to play Retromania was how freaking difficult the game can be, even when playing the game on the lowest difficulty settings. The big difference with this game's toughness in comparison to Wrestlefest is that you do not have the option to insert new credits to replenish health this time, so Retromania can be brutally difficult for people picking it up for the first time. The game accurately portrays arcade style difficulty, so be prepared to overcome a steep learning curve. Overall, playing the game myself, I must congratulate the people of Retrosoft for delivering a beautiful game full of stunning pixel artwork that accurately replicates the art style found in the Japanese arcade classics, with a gameplay style that matches the wrestling games that were popular over that era too. But as usual, just because I know that more than my own opinion counts, let's hear the conclusions that other people drew on this game across the information superhighway. OperationSports.com would comment,
"Without the WWF license, Retromania Wrestling still shines with a roster consisting of current NWA superstars, legends, and some of the biggest names of professional wrestling. You won't be able to pick this game up and immediately dominate. It will take time. But once you're able to master the controls, it's hard to put the controller down. It may have taken over 30 years to come to fruition, but what the talented developers over at Retrosoft Studios were able to accomplish is everything I could have hoped for here."
PC Invasion would be a bit tougher on the game, particularly when it comes to the in-game difficulty, stating,
"Despite its dated aesthetics, Retromania Wrestling can still bring the pain. Unfortunately, that struggle translates to issues both in and out of the ring. Sometimes it's important to consider why design decisions were abandoned in the past, rather than meticulously recreating frustrating mechanics for modern audiences in the name of authenticity."
PureXbox.com would add that,
"Retromania is an enjoyable game. The art style is fantastic. The gameplay is classic 90s style fun, and you can tell it's been made by people who really love the business of professional wrestling. It's not going to replace WWE 2K series for casual fans, but hardcore wrestling aficionados might just fall in love with it."
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Retromania is basically exactly what it claims to be on the tin. A retro-inspired wrestling game that was created from the influence of WrestleFest. Imitating a game from 30 years ago will certainly result in a product with its fair share of pros and cons. But ultimately, if you are looking for a new WrestleFest, Retromania then has you covered, which is exactly what this game was designed to do in the first place. If this is a title you fancy playing yourself, it is available now on Steam, Xbox and the Nintendo Switch, with the game planned to arrive on Sony PlayStation services shortly. So there is a number of different ways you can play this game and make up your own mind with regards to what you think of it. If you enjoyed today's video, I have uploaded standalone videos on both Superstars and WrestleFest for you to check out down the line. But before that, make sure you subscribe to my brand new wrestling channel, Top Hat Wrestling Man, where in the first week we look at the ludicrous story of Shelton Benjamin's mama. As for this channel, huge thank yous go out to everyone who watched this content today, and of course those wonderful people who back me on Patreon, allowing me to make videos like this full time. Shout outs go out to Sebastian Velez, A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heo Paulo Lopez, Ben Harradine, Corey Imar Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Ryan Dinch, Evan Balder, Philip Namph, Azra Rawakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Michael Cullix, Ago, Jordan Durant, Angel Light 85, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of Ted, Craig Jenkins, ECU Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Aaron McNamara, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Michael Hall, Wesley Sang Hee, Wayne Kerr, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Vladimir Renee, Marvin Araliga, Chris Call, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Dan Van Dammit, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bow, Chris Fisk, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazansky, Gunther Hendricks, and to everybody who watches my work week in and week out. I love you very much. Thank you. Cheerio!